Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shanti. I am the founder and executive director of Silence to Shame Incorporated. We are a nonprofit and we exist to educate and empower communities around mental health. And I hope everyone is safe and healthy, and just prayers out to everyone at this time. These are uncertain times that we're living in. These are new normals. These are now normals, as we're calling them. And so, Silence to Shame is trying to do our part to bring these community conversations, mental health Q&As to your homes, into your living rooms, your bedrooms, or wherever you sit and take in your information. But we hope that you will find this webinar helpful. And as I mentioned, we will be making this available on our YouTube page. You can just go under YouTube at Silence to Shame and feel free to send it out to as many people as you would like. I'm really excited about our guests today. I have worked with both of them in the past and very grateful to both of you ladies for sharing your time with us today. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Ayanna Abrams, as I like to fondly call you, Dr. A. Could you give us a little background information about you and your practice and what you do?
Sure. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I am based in Atlanta. My practice primarily serves adults. So I work with college students, graduate students, and professionals. I work with a lot of moms and new moms and birthers kind of across the spectrum of family planning. And a large part of my practice is also dedicated to working with couples at any phase of coupledom, from dating throughout divorce. That's primarily who I see here. And a large part of my practice is also dedicated to conversations and community dialogues, which works very, very well with Silence to Shame, to be able to allow people to access mental health information and accurate mental health information so we can take better care of ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us. And next, I would like to introduce Miss Maestra, who is an educator and a parent and just an all-around amazing individual. You've been featured on our Silence to Shame podcast in the past. So thank you so much for sharing your story around postpartum depression. So can you give us a little bit of background info on yourself as well?
Yeah. So you hit the highlights. I am an educator. I've taught in Gwinnett County. I taught for the Ron Clark Academy. And now for 3 years, I've been an independent educator teaching online, right? So teaching Spanish. And so I'm also, what brought me here, a mother of 3. I have a 16-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 11-year-old. So, I'm pretty busy right now.
Yes, awesome. Sure. Well, thank you again, everyone. This is Silence to Shame, a community conversation mental health Q&A, managing postpartum depression during a pandemic. So we're going to jump right into the conversation. According to WebMD, postpartum depression occurs in women soon after giving birth. Symptoms include sadness and hopelessness, and I'm sure there are a ton of other symptoms. Dr. Ayanna, can you give us some additional information on signs and symptoms of postpartum depression? I know some people call it PPD as well, but share with us what you can so that we can educate our community a little bit more around what it is and what those symptoms look like.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate even you highlighting those 2 specific symptoms, because those are things to pay attention to that transform it from baby blues into possibly a postpartum depressive episode. What we tend to know and kind of what media shows us is that there's this period of time after a birther gives birth that there are hormonal changes, there are quite literal, changes in your environment, changes in your sleep pattern, changes in your access to your support system, because, right, you have to be so consumed by taking care of this new life, right, in your life, in your home, in your relationships. And there can be a really tricky balance between recognizing whether this is the common baby blues that many birthers experiences versus this is turning into what could be an episode for me. And even thinking about how we are able to diagnose postpartum depression is that we're looking between 6 months after giving birth and up to a year, we can diagnose somebody with having postpartum symptoms. And you're looking at an intensity of those baby blues. All right, so you're looking at a sadness that feels more prolonged. It doesn't feel as isolated, right, kind of day to day for you. You're looking at loss of pleasure, right, and things related to baby, related to your relationships, related to your support systems. Hopelessness is a key thing that kind of changes between whether it would be considered baby blues to a depressive episode. There's no sense of hope that this will change or get better, or I'll feel more control, or I'll feel kind of love and attachment, right, to this experience, as well as noticing, again, really poor sleep patterns that are already going to be changed, but if that is prolonged in a way, changes in your appetite, changes in your mood and how you connect to other people. If you do have a support system, which is really important, not wanting to connect to them, right? If you recognize that you're trying to go to sleep and can't get to sleep even though you're exhausted, right? Those are things that might tell you, okay, this is something different that's going on, all right, for me. And it might be that's the perfect time to really assess how you can get help and how you can reach out to some other spaces, right? So we're not just looking at the common baby blues, but when they feel more intense or when they feel prolonged for you.
Great. Thank you for listing all of those signs and symptoms. Ms. Maestra, can you share with us a little bit about when you first experienced PPD and kind of like what that was like for you?
Yeah, I think after my second child, child number 2 and 3 are actually 11 months apart. So I had them really close back to back. And I think that during that time is when I go back and reflect where those symptoms that the doctor just mentioned that I was experiencing. And so not only am I going through that, I have a newborn, but also I'm getting pregnant with another one. And it's just like a blur at that point. And people tell you things like, it's not easy, you know what I'm saying, for anybody. You know, like it's gonna just happen, but it wasn't for me. I just kind of felt like those loneliness, anxiety, like I wasn't, you know, kind of doing enough. And really at the end of the day, I felt like equivalent to a bad mother, you know, and I was afraid to bring that up, to mention it. Although my husband was like, you know what, like, I think you have postpartum depression, you know, and that was something that culturally we didn't talk about, something that wasn't really mentioned. We're strong women, you know what I'm saying? So like that idea that I was going through some form of depression, I was not willing to accept. And then it kind of took a snowball effect after I had my third child. After that, it started to become severe, but at the moment, I didn't know it was severe, you know? And that was the thing. In the moment, you don't realize people are telling you, but it's like blah, 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 blah. You just hear noise, you know, because you almost can't get out of it. So I knew that I needed help. Yeah. When I ended up getting arrested because of postpartum depression.
Dr.
So
A,
I needed help
go ahead.
When I lost control. And, you know, my family was afraid and they ended up calling the police, you know? And even at the time when I got arrested, I was like, you know what? Like, they were like, hey, like your husband's on the phone. He wants to talk to you about your kids. I was like, let him figure it out. I literally remember being numb and just being like, you know, just having zero feelings, you know? And so that's, you know, when I go back and reflect, I think that moment I look at it and be like, that's kind of when I started feeling like, okay, something's not right, but I still didn't know what it was. I just knew I was going to jail.
Dr. A, can you add a little context to that? And obviously, some mothers, you know, experience it differently. Obviously, unfortunately, Ms. Maestra had to experience the authorities getting called, but just kind of talk about even the trauma of that experience and the effects on the family and, you know, how we can possibly recognize it before it gets to that level.
Yeah, you know, and Miss Maestra, you know, spoke to a number of different points that my ears perked up around that can really make any depressive episode, particularly at this period, feel so much more isolating, is the shame and the guilt that comes with the bad mom theme, right? That in me not being able to do this or not look like how media portrays this or how social media portrays this, that there's something inherently wrong with me. And nobody wants to talk about that, right? That's the shame that comes in and really turns a lot of new parents inside themselves, and then things can get progressively worse from there, because then we're not sharing, oh, I'm having these thoughts of this. Oh, I'm feeling really worried about this, right? Oh, I'm feeling disconnected from myself in these ways. We stop talking about it, right? Because it doesn't feel as though there's a safe space to even honor any of that, because you're going to get people in your life who say, well, that's normal. That's what this looks like. Right. Every mom goes through this, right? So then it's like, well, why talk about it if nobody's going to help me with anything and nobody's going to validate what I'm experiencing, that's one of the hallmarks that can really turn, again, baby blues into a full-blown depressive episode, right? For a lot of new people, not having the space outside of them to even feel safe enough to say something's not well. So it begins showing up in our behaviors, and that's what you were talking about, right? So even if I wasn't acknowledging this, it's manifesting in these ways, right? And oftentimes something else or some other entity is the one that helps us kind of stop engaging in those patterns, right? And depending on what our support system looks like, if we have people in our lives who can recognize some of those symptoms, they might be the first ones who say, hey, is something else going on here? And is there something I can help you with, even if we're not able to do it ourselves, right? So ideally that would be a close family member, if there is a shared parent in the situation, or a medical provider, right? Because that's oftentimes the only people who we're seeing at that time, right? And that's what's also different about navigating this in a pandemic. Our social support system is totally different now in terms of how we're used to accessing them. So really wanting to pay attention to the isolation and the silence that comes with this, on top of, you mentioned so many things, the cultural piece that comes in, right? That how am I already expected to do this, right? And am I performing this role properly, right? Versus recognizing that, hey, this is a psychological event. This is not just physical, right? This is changing the way in which I know myself, the way in which I see myself. And do I have spaces to fully honor that? And if I don't, again, that's where we might see some more of those depressive symptoms begin to show up.
And so I want to touch a little bit on, you mentioned isolation. That kind of leads me to my next question. I'll read something that I read from an article that we posted on Silence to Shame's Facebook page last week. So there's a couple who just recently had a newborn. The mother was struggling to breastfeed, and the family wanted to see the baby and couldn't come over, obviously, for social distancing reasons. The mother said, it sounds so selfish, but I keep thinking that this isn't the maternity leave I envisioned. I thought I'd be able to see friends and they'd be able to see my baby and enjoy them. It just totally all around completely sucks, is what she said. And she began feeling more anxious and depressed as a result of that. Can you talk, Dr. Ayanna, about how during the quarantine, how it can be so difficult for mothers, especially even the isolation with single parents that may not even have a spouse or support, you know, while trying to maintain their mental wellness? And then Ms. Maestra, will get your opinion on that as well.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is this grieving, right? That there are ways in which, whether before someone becomes pregnant or throughout their pregnancy, we begin to envision ways in which we want this process to look, ways in which we want our support system to be there, ways in which we want the medical or non-medical procedure to look, right? And what it forces, and given that we don't always have control over what the actual birth will look like, a lot of new parents struggle with the grief of that. I have fantasized this for so long. I've had everything kind of planned out, everything picked out in a certain way. And then as the universe will have it, that's not going to happen. And I haven't prepared for it not happen, right? So now I'm sitting in this huge kind of state of grief, and I have this baby to take care of, right? And it can be a very, very disorienting process. And when there's grief and when there's trauma that as it relates to that, it actually makes it more likely that you might experience a depressive episode because you haven't had time enough to reconcile that grieving process for you. So you're moving through all these stages of grief, and it's like, well, I can't feel this too much because I've got to take care of this baby. So I've got to kind of put my needs right away or kind of suppress them in some way. And as you mentioned, when it comes to single parents who don't have that support in the space with them, and now people also can't come over, you can feel like you're navigating all of this by yourself, right? So while it does make it more likely that a depressive symptom or depressive episode may show up, it means that we have to really access and heighten our coping mechanisms, right? So reaching out to people, even if it's for emotional support and distractions at that time, if that's what you can access, seeing if you can access that more and more and more, right? That your typical coping skills are not going to work. We've got to up the ante on your coping.
Absolutely. Ms. Maestra, do you have anything that you would say to moms? I know that obviously you experienced your PPD pre-COVID, but what would you say to parents that are experiencing that right now? Because as Dr. Ayanna was saying, it just adds so many more layers, and it exacerbates the, you know, the current situation that you're experiencing. When you think about the fact that you can't have family members come over, you can't have friends help you when you just need that break, right? Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
No, yeah. Well, first of all, if you can speak, say something, call your girlfriend, tell your mom, because they may not know, you know, and they may not know the answer, but tell somebody, because I remember calling someone and saying the thought of wanting to kill myself.
Mm.
And the fact that she said, Joyce, don't, made a difference.
Yeah, that's wow. I mean, the fact that you even, you know, uttered those words, and, you know, I want everyone on the webinar today, and whoever may watch it in the future, to realize, like, these are really serious thoughts. The suicidal ideation, the fact that you don't even sometimes want to be around your child, you know, or your spouse. Can you give us some coping mechanisms, Dr. Ayanna? I know a lot of clinicians like yourself and other people are engaging in telehealth and other services, like, you know, kind of walk us through what that looks like if we are, you know, if we can muster up the courage to ask for help. How do we get the help?
Yeah, and I think even, you know, as Ms. Maestra was sharing that story, that first it requires this level of vulnerability with yourself, right, and recognizing that these are thoughts that I'm having,
Right.
And to navigate our own shame around having these thoughts. And a lot of people believe that these thoughts are so uncommon, right? But particularly for new moms, this is really common. It really, really comes up in these ways of, and it's not always connected to, I actually do want to harm myself. It's typically, I am so overwhelmed and I don't know how not to feel overwhelmed outside of that option.
Right.
Oftentimes it's rooted in desperation. Right, it's rooted in overwhelm. It's not rooted in an actual desire, right? But it's you kind of, it's this kind of cry for help internally and externally. I don't know what else to do. Please, someone help me in this way. So one, being able to acknowledge it to yourself. And ideally, if you do have a support system, people you can call, FaceTime with, jump on a Zoom call, any of those things are going to be really, really important right now. In the event that you don't have those spaces, if you want to be able to still even acknowledge it and get it out of your head and out of your system, I think journaling is really helpful during this time for a lot of people as another means to kind of express yourself, even if it's not landing with someone else and they can give something back to you. There can be something very powerful in seeing your own words, your own handwriting, or in your own voice. So voice recordings can also be helpful. Just to be able to have that process become more externalized for you can be really helpful. Watching things that allow you to experience some level, even if it is 30 seconds, some level of joy, some level of peace, some level of humor. Oftentimes we think that we're not allowed to access those things, right? Because there's a crisis going on around us, but that's what's really helping us move through these moments. And again, it doesn't have to be, well, okay, I've got to sit and meditate for 37 minutes in order for this to be meaningful. If you can get 90 seconds, right, of some breath work, right, or some time where you are just kind of silent and sitting in yourself, that can do wonders, right? And then you're looking at, how do I use the clarity of this moment to move to my next moment? Not even planning around, how do I make this week a great week? If it looks like I'm just moving moment to moment, that's kind of the mindfulness practice that's really helpful to get into if you don't have access to a support system in those ways. There's also a lot of online groups, and those were present before, but they've absolutely increased in the times of COVID, where you can connect to other birthers, you can connect to professionals in that way. So even if it's not a therapist or your therapist, sometimes it's helpful just to connect to other narratives that can feel really validating. And I think at some point we're going to share some websites that have a lot of resources where you can get to some online groups that are available. And a lot of them are free as well.
That's great. Do we have any questions? I know we have some non-video participants, but AJ, are we able to take any questions right now?
Yes, we can. Give me a second. Guys, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat window, or you can raise your hands and I will make you guys available.
I see a question. Can I say the question out loud?
Go right ahead.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, I have a question, which is a really, really great question. What about intrusive thoughts? Being isolated and not being able to leave during this pandemic makes them worse. And intrusive thoughts is a large part of what shows up in depressive symptoms and anxiety, right, for new moms. That we have these thoughts that we cannot control, and it can feel really difficult to slow them down, right, to either kind of make them into a whisper or to make them less powerful. And what can be really helpful with intrusive thoughts is also developing some mantras or some self-talk where you're talking back to this intrusive thought. So a lot of new moms will say that they have intrusive thoughts about being a bad mother. They have intrusive thoughts about not being good enough. They have intrusive thoughts about, I should do something differently, right? Oftentimes our intrusive thoughts are rooted in shoulds, right? Ways in which we should be, again, because we've seen it on TV, because we've seen women in our life do this, because we kind of see these kind of idealized ways in which this should look.
Mm-hmm.
And what can be really helpful is offering yourself some compassion. So a book I'd recommend, I think it's literally called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. It's a way in which it gives you some very, very clear tools. She also has a website. It gives you some very, very clear tools and skills of things we can say back to ourselves when those intrusive thoughts can come up. Because it can be really, really difficult to get yourself off the hamster wheel of those thoughts when they start cycling. So you're looking at ways to disrupt those thoughts, and journaling can also help with that, right? So when you're noticing the intrusive thoughts, either you want to write down some of the thoughts, or you want to write down, well, what would I say to a friend who said this about herself?
Mm-hmm.
What would I say to a family member who said this about herself? Because oftentimes we can grasp compassion for other people even if we can't do it for ourselves. So it's a really good way to practice talking to yourself in a much, much kinder way.
What was the name of the book again?
Self-Compassion.
Self-compassion. Okay, we'll type that.
Of course, and all this stuff, right? But that's oftentimes a skill that we don't have, and that can be really, really helpful when these thoughts start cycling.
Okay, fantastic. I want to go back to you, Miss Maestra. What was it like? Like, how did your family react to what you were going through when you were experiencing?
Yeah, so
How that affected the family?
They observed. They were observing me and they wanted me to get treatment. And, again, I just was not trying to hear it. That even my mother, she was like, like in our country, we don't have treatment for this. Like here, you're in a country where you have access to healthcare, you have access.
Where are you from?
To give attention to this, Honduras. So she's like, like you need to, you have insurance, like go to the doctor. And I just refused to. And kind of going also back to what you were mentioning about kind of, what are some things that, moms can do to kind of go through this? Like we tell you, okay, listen, keep a journal, which I love, definitely helps. Rate your emotional, like from 1 to 100, right? Like when you're super outraged is 100, and write the why, or maybe if it's a 50, kind of the why. But there is that tunnel vision that no matter what you're telling us, it's really hard to break through, And from my experience, it's like for those women watching, or if you're watching, someone who's going through that, I would like to ask the doctor, like, what are some ways that we can kind of break through that shell that someone doesn't end up getting angry and irate and mad that causes, the police at your front door to avoid this?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question that when we're looking at and I wish actually more communities talked about this, that postpartum rage is really a thing. And because there's so much shame attached to that, we don't talk about, man, I'm angry. I am mad, right? I feel robbed of so much of my identity in a lot of ways. That loss is a big theme when it comes to birthing and kind of the shift that happens with you. So early intervention is always key, right? When you begin noticing those things, that's the time in which you can start processing. Oftentimes we wait for a certain kind of severity of distress in order to then determine like, oh, well, now's the time in which something needs to happen. Like it needs to get bad enough. Versus being able to implement those things as soon as possible, right? So when you begin having a thought that feels uncomfortable, that's when you can talk about it. You have full permission to talk about it right then, because what happens in that waiting is that you develop this new practice of, oh, well, that's just common. That's a thought that I had yesterday, right? And then it builds and builds and builds because there hasn't been any other processing of it. So you want to do something as soon as possible. That when I'm having this thought, again, it doesn't make me a bad person, a bad parent, a bad mom, a bad partner, a bad family member, but this is normal and common, and I'm able to ask for what I need in this moment, right? And again, and when that feels really hard for you, that's actually a cue that says, I need some help.
Yeah.
I need to tough this out. It's hard, but I got to figure it out by myself. That's actually the exact moment when say, this is hard. I don't have to do this alone. And if I don't have access in terms of my immediate support system, there is somebody else who has navigated this that I can reach to, right? Again, the shame and the silence will have us tell ourselves this myth that nobody else is going through this the way I am. I am so unique in this. I'm the only one who's navigating this at this age, in this county, in this, right, in this school system, versus there are so many birthers who are navigating this, but we don't know it. We don't know it because nobody's talking about it.
You want to add to that, Ms. Maestra?
Well, when she's saying like we try to hide it, it brings out kind of the professional point of view for me, because as an educator, the last thing I wanted was my mugshot to be at 11 o'clock in news. I was like, this is my passion. I love teaching. You know what I'm saying? And so, luckily I was able to avoid that. But the reason I got treatment was not because of my family. It wasn't even because of me. It's because the court made me. The court said, okay, you're a first timer, you've never done anything, but part of your probation is you're going to get treatment. So it's crazy, because to be honest, if they had made me, I would have been like, okay, I'll do it. And I never would have gone. I never still would have gone, that's what I needed. When I continued in my field in education, I remember a fellow educator coming up to me, because I knew I teach middle school, I work with middle schools. I know they Google you, So I knew that this would come up one day in the classroom, but I also knew it was going to give me an opportunity to be a voice, that I didn't want to hide it, because I knew postpartum depression was a thing, but it just wasn't a thing. Like Silence is Shame is making it, like for it to be known. And so one day, the teacher was like, hey, you could pay money to get it removed. And I'm like, I'm not paying, because this is a story I have to tell. I don't know when I'm gonna tell it, but I know it's a story I'm gonna tell, because I want to help other women. I want to help children understand their parents. And so I'm sitting in class, like teaching, and that hand goes up, and they're like, Miss Maestra, we have a question to ask you. And I'm like, no, it's coming. And they're like, hey, we heard you have a mugshot on the internet.
Oh, wow.
And I said, you're right, I do. And I was like, they were like, why? And I said, look, I was going through postpartum depression. And I made it into a lesson. Post, after, partum, giving birth, depression. And I explained, I said, I went through sadness after having my child, and explained a little bit without too much, because they were in 6th grade at the time. And I was really nervous, because I was like, oh goodness, I don't know who's gonna be open to me sharing this when they get home, because I know they were gonna tell their parents.
Right.
And so that night I get a call from Miss Cooper, who is like one of the tough moms. I'm like, and she's got 6 kids, and I'm like, hello. She's like, I'm just gonna say thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Malia came home and she said, Mom, I'm sorry. She cleaned up for me. She did the dishes, because her babies were still young. And so she was like, I get it when Mom's going through. And so it was that one moment that I was like, you know what? I'm not going to hide from this. I want it to be a story. Yeah, I'm an educator. Yeah, I have a mugshot, but it's a life experience that I have to kind of live through to now kind of be able to share it and be mentally a little healthier, So I hope that we continue talking about it. And but anyway, that what you were saying was inspiring, just, that moment of my time with postpartum depression.
I'm just so grateful to you for your voice within the, the Latino community, as well as the community at large. And that's a real reason why Silence is Shame exists. One of our main genres, if you will, are communities of color. And how the stigma is still so great, whether it is postpartum depression or suicidal ideation or bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or, a plethora of other mental illnesses. We want to really try to get the information to the community so people can be educated and understand the importance of getting help. I'm so excited, speaking of communities of color, to welcome Valerie from Kenya, who's joining us today. And she says, thank you for organizing this webinar. She has a great question. And her question, and I'll direct this first to Dr. A and then to Maestra. Is there a possibility of having another episode of PPD in a subsequent childbirth? If yes, what can be done to prevent it? I don't even know if it can be, if it can be prevented, but can you shed some information on that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. That actually the factors that indicate more likelihood, it doesn't guarantee, but indicate more likelihood of a postpartum depressive episode is any previous episodes, any history of any mental health issues or diagnoses even before there's ever been an initial pregnancy. Those all make it more likely that you might experience some of these symptoms. So in being able to know that, there are things that you can do in terms of early intervention that even if you can't prevent it, do you still have some coping skills, right, to help you manage that time, right? And those look like, again, some of the things we had mentioned, but linking up with a therapist can be really helpful, and a therapist who specializes in maternal mental health, like I do, and therapists across your states who specialize in this specific kind of depression that shows up. And sometimes that also might be helpful in terms of getting a prescription for any antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication that can be really helpful to mediate or moderate any subsequent depressive episodes that might come up.
And of course, if you were to do that, you'd have to make sure your GYN,
Yes.
talk to your psychiatrist and make sure that whatever you're taking is healthy for your child. So always make sure that, before taking any medication, that you consult with your primary healthcare physician or your OBGYN.
And that they can all actually be part of your treatment.
Exactly.
With a lot of NICU nurses, labor and delivery nurses, PCPs, OBGYNs, so that we're all on the same page about what's in the best benefit of this birther. Absolutely.
Right. But I can imagine going ahead and making sure, like you mentioned, having a therapist on your team to be able to talk through this process will certainly help you navigate your next pregnancy. Ms. Maestra, do you have anything to add? Or with your
I do. But real quick, I definitely think we need to add like therapists to like our, OBGYN, our eye doctor, our dentist. Like therapists needs to be part of that checklist that we do with our health. But yeah, I think like I mentioned, my last two are 11 months apart. And I definitely feel that when I reflect back and look at it, like the fact that I was still trying to grasp the fact that I still had a newborn and then pregnant again, which I understand was my choice, but jumping right into it, it was like a roller coaster ride that didn't quite stop, just kind of kept going. So, and I guess, my question is, and because I keep going back to that feeling of how you feel at that moment, like no matter what people are telling you, even if you're listening right now, you may think like, yeah, but my body hurts to even move. Like, I don't want to kind of go through this. Like, what is a quick solution? Like I've seen apps there. I haven't gone on it, but like what to expect, I think is maybe a solution, because sometimes you need that immediate, solution, that immediate call, So again, I'm just kind of sharing out loud, thinking, hoping that somebody that's listening is going to seek treatment or Google, this type of app, because if you need help, like today is the day to like seek help.
That's right. In those moments that can feel so intense, that's where a lot of the mindfulness exercises can come in, because again, it's just about how do I move through these next 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes and being able to kind of come back into that. And something that I hadn't mentioned before, that is one of the best indicators in a way of being able to kind of move through some of these emotions and kind of different states is sleep, right? And there's already this kind of understanding like, oh, if you have a baby, your sleep is going to be off, right? But if we keep promoting that your sleep is going to be off, we begin accepting that, nope, I'm just not going to get any sleep. And sleep is highly, highly indicated as a regulator of all of this, not even just where you are biologically and physiologically, but also your mental health. So the best thing, right, the new moms and kind of new birthers can do, and support systems, is to find ways in which she can get some, all right, because sleep is restorative. It obviously kind of gives you a break in terms of the day-to-day stressors of it, but that restorative piece is remarkably important. And I think in general, we take sleep for granted.
Absolutely. Right. And there's some really cool meditation apps posted on our Silence to Shame Instagram page, but a few are Inscape, Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer,
absolutely,
Smiling Mind, Aura, and Yoga Glow. Those I think, could be particularly helpful as you try to find ways to kind of recenter yourself, or, if you tell your husband, look, I need an hour, I'm going to go in here and go in either my closet or go in the bathroom and close the door, or go in my sunroom or something, and just take some time out for yourself. Do we have any more questions from anyone? Feel free to either write them in the chat section, or, if you want to ask us a question?
Yeah. Doctor, we've been talking a lot about, like, from my point of view, right? Like, help, like, what can I do? But what if you are a family member or friend that eyeballs it? Like, what is maybe your suggestion, a good way to approach that person?
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
And I think, yeah, great question. Like, how do we support people when we think that this might be happening? In the same way, which we were talking about, kind of literally kind of silencing the shame, being able to point out, like, hey, I've noticed this. Hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Hey, what do you need? What can I do for you? Right. So depending on how close to you are to them, so sometimes you can anticipate that. So if there's something you can do around meal prepping, if there's something you can do around washing clothes, the laundry, anything related to laundry, food, and allowing the birther to get some sleep, those are going to be the most helpful things, right? You also want to be able to offer some emotional support without judgment, without question, right? But just, how are you feeling now? What do you need? Because oftentimes new birthers feel as though they've lost their voice. Again, I can't say anything. I'm not alive. I'm complaining if I say this, right? This is just a normal part of this, but being able to really empathize and ask them what they need gives them a whole shift in terms of being able to feel validated, right? In the times of COVID, again, if there's not anybody there in that space, meal delivery, right? Sending things to them, doing grocery shopping for them, like an Instacart order, those things can be remarkably helpful because it's one less thing that she has to navigate and or do and or pay for in whichever way. That's really helpful during this time, right? Sending over meals that are already cooked.
Yeah.
Really helpful. So she knows that this thing is already happening. I know that I can take care of myself because I know that there's a meal. I don't have to figure out how to cook while baby is sleeping. I might be able to sleep while baby is sleeping, right? So those kinds of things right now, any delivery services, great. Laundry services where she just has to put a bag out and they can pick it up and do stuff. All of that are really helpful right now.
That's a great point. I read an interesting article earlier. I think it was published a few days ago, but we just put it up on the Silence to Shame Facebook page this morning. And it was interesting because it was talking about just the burnout that parents are experiencing. They're zoomed out, they're worked out, you know, the 8-hour, 9-hour workday hours or schedule rather is now 12 hours or even more. There are like fewer and fewer boundaries within the home, and then you add parenting on top of that. And the article wasn't about postpartum depression, but it was just about the stress that is coming with, I think, the exhaustion, if you will, from the quarantine. And certainly, again, you add on being a parent, even if you've never experienced postpartum depression, you're going to experience some level of stress and anxiety. Because I just think, you know, some states are starting to slowly reopen, although we want to make sure you're staying home and still being safe in your respective areas. What would you say to the folks, Dr. A, that are just over it altogether and that just may be experiencing stress as a mom and a parent and trying to hold it together? You know, the advice is great, but like, what can they do right now to just like figure this thing out? You know, are there some free services? I know you mentioned there are some free therapy services out there, but where would you really point them to? Because I just think some people, not a lot, but some people may be getting to their breaking point, and we want to do what we can to provide tools and resources so we can avoid that.
Yeah. And I think even in the first vein, outside of what we do physically, is this internal work around, hey, I'm over it because it makes sense that I'm over it. I don't know how to do this. I had no plans for this. So even allowing yourself some emotional or mental room to say, it's okay that I'm over it. I'm not the only person who feels over it. I think that can also be transformative initially. Then you can get to, I appreciate you saying boundaries, right? That the best way to navigate burnout is setting boundaries, right? And allowing yourself to kind of honor that I need breaks in between things, right? Because what we're looking at is this blur. We don't have this commute that kind of breaks up our home life and our work life. We don't have this, externalized like half-hour lunch that we would, kind of take in these ways because we're owed it. So we are just blending everything together. And what's been really helpful is to still separate these things out, right? And if you're in a space where there are other people in there, being able to put something that says, hey, this is when I'm available and this is when I'm not, right? And getting more practice at that, and not, a lot of people don't practice boundaries because they feel hard. And because we're worried about being mean or inaccessible in these ways, and that actually makes it more likely for you to experience burnout. You want to set those boundaries even if they're hard, right? Because we're draining ourselves more and more and more when all of our demands have now collided into one space. And I've turned the bedroom into the office, right? And the kitchen becomes the place in which the kids are doing their virtual learning, and like all this stuff gets blurred. So we have to do what we can to still find some separation between those systems. And again, if we have another adult in the home or an old enough child, that can be collaborative. Hey, when I'm doing this, this is when you can do this. What do you need today that looks like this? And being able to work together to figure out what we do need, but also allowing ourselves to have different needs. Our needs in these last 45 days are needs that maybe we have not had before. It doesn't make them any less valid or any less valuable. But, oh, I didn't need this before. Why would I need this now? Well, because it's a pandemic and everything is different now, right? And you also get to be different now and have different needs. But again, honoring that starts internally, and then you can externalize that to kind of ask your system for what you need.
Those are all great points. Ms. Maestra, now that you have, teenagers or preteens, I would kind of ask you the same question. What advice can you give to moms that may be experiencing, maybe not severe PPD, but are just really stressed out, and, we're trying to avoid it becoming a situation where they do need to, either talk to their doctor or what have you, before it gets too severe? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I definitely would mimic what was just said, kind of understanding, like trying to split it, even though it's super hard, for me to be like, all right, guys, I'm teaching right now, but then like somebody's probably starting a fire in the kitchen. So I get it, it gets very difficult, but learning how to separate your time. I mean, it's way easier said than done, but most important, use this time to heal yourself. Use this time to write your feelings down, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and use this time to seek treatment. This is some good downtime where you can actually try to better your situation, because you have all this me time. And again, it's just, I myself am still having a challenge with my own children, but I also know what my children like, what they don't like, and rediscover that with your kids. Believe it or not, I bought a kite the other day from Dollar General. It cost me like $3, that if we weren't going through this, my kids would have ignored, but they were so excited. They went outside, what I'm saying? So it's, just reevaluate, just what's going to bring that happiness, not just, for your kids, but also for yourself.
And I think probably also, and I'm not a parent, so again, I'm no expert in any form or fashion, but I do have 3 nieces and 3 nephews. So I would like to refer to myself as super aunt. And my sister passed away last year, but I spent a lot of time, around my sister and watching her raise her kids, and being able to, lean on the oldest child some, not to take their childhood away in any form or fashion, but maybe, delegating some of the responsibilities and getting the family, to chime in and support. I saw a news report the other day that some parents are utilizing like virtual playtime, where people are reading to the kids. And it's not to say you're not watching after them, but there's still, something else that you can do to maybe pull in an auntie to have some fun FaceTime with your kids. So maybe you and your husband or your partner can have a breather. Certainly I would just encourage people to be creative, and think in and out of the box, if you will, because like you said, this is something that none of us expected that we would be going through, Dr. Ayanna. But it really is about a village. And when you think about it, you got to utilize the village around you. And even if you don't have your own, nuclear family, I still think family is friends, that you choose to be your family sometimes. So, utilize the friendships that you've made. Do we have any more questions? We're about 13 minutes out of the hour. I hope everyone is enjoying the conversation. I think, Dr. Ayanna and certainly Ms. Maestra is giving some really wonderful information that I hope you can go back and share within your families, in your homes and in your communities. So we're going to take any more questions at this time. If not, we'll go ahead and start maybe listing out some resources. Dr. Ayanna, do you have any websites that you want to list out for us to refer to?
Yeah, one of my favorite websites related to all things postpartum, and where I have my training through, is Postpartum Support International.
Awesome.
So they have a lot of information on their site. They also have a list of different states that have providers, that have online groups, that have online information for you, that can help you connect to any providers in your area. They also have a crisis line that you can call, right? So you can kind of call in and connect to somebody. It's a really, really robust resource, right? For anybody in any phase or stage of birthing or family planning to be able to access some real life support. Another site I really like is Postpartum Stress. I think it's stress dot, it might be .net. That one might be .net. But similar resources. They also have books and articles that are available for you if you want to take in more information about what you might be experiencing, or being able to share that information with a loved one. Those things are really, really helpful for a lot of people to be able to access online support if they can't access it, again, in their immediate circles or in their communities. There's just a robust and kind of revolving way in which these sites provide support, and recognizing how important this period of time is, and again, the early intervention.
Okay, great. Ms. Maestra, do you have any final words that you'd like to give or encouragement for our mothers out there, and even our girl dads?
Yeah, for sure. You know what? You know, like, you have to love yourself first for anybody else to love you. And you have to take care of yourself so you can take care of your children. I know that it may seem like, you know, like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but there always is. And so whether you tell a friend, whether you go on an app and seek treatment, or through a social media group, just, you know, speak to someone, you know, say something.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and I want to remind everyone that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Silence to Shame is going to be doing additional community conversations, but as mentioned, we will be putting up this webinar on our YouTube page. So please go to YouTube and subscribe to Silence to Shame TV. We also have a podcast on Google Play, iTunes, and SoundCloud. We have over 30 episodes up featuring both Dr. Ayanna and Ms. Maestra. So hopefully you can utilize that as a resource. And May 5th is National Silence to Shame Day. So please consider donating to our organization as we continue to provide programs and resources to underserved communities. And we just thank you guys again. Remember to give yourself some grace, give yourself permission to have the me time that you need. And don't feel bad about leaning on family and friends. It doesn't make you a bad parent, doesn't make you a bad mother. It's difficult raising, you know, children, especially when you have multiple kids. And so don't be afraid to ask for help. What's not okay is not getting the help, but it's okay to not be okay. But we want you to know that that help is available and that resources are out there, especially during the pandemic. So many, as we mentioned earlier, mental health professionals are doing free therapy or charging on a sliding scale, even if you don't have insurance. You know, I would check with your local hospitals and agencies, but just know, again, that help is there. So thank you all. I wish you peace, joy, love, sanity, and just take care of yourself during this pandemic. And thank you again to, let's give a round of applause virtually, woo, for Dr. Ayanna Abrams and Ms. Maestra. And let's continue to silence the shame in our communities around mental health. Thank you guys so much, and have a blessed day.
Good afternoon.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.